Good afternoon. Just ticked past the hour, so I'm going to start off by welcoming everybody to Transport Action Canada's annual general meeting for 2021. My name is Terence Johnson. I am currently president of Transport Action. We have, until last year, met in Ottawa or another major city each spring for our annual meeting. And when we met online for our 2020 AGM back in September, itself delayed because of the pandemic. I don't think we expected to still be doing everything by Zoom heading into this summer. Nevertheless, here we are. And once we can meet in person again, we'll also try and keep this online option going to connect members across the country. Since our founding as Transport 2000 Canada and our first meeting held in Regina in 1976, Transport Action Canada has promoted sustainable public transport for all Canadians and been a voice for the passenger, speaking up for dependable and affordable service for all, from our largest cities to our smallest rural communities, and from the Atlantic to the Pacific to the Arctic. When we talk to our friends about public transport, and when you do, please invite them to join Transport Action, and to our politicians about investing in our urban transit systems, our ferries, rural transportation, and passenger rail, we must communicate why this is important. Soon, we may see our governments begin to tighten their purse strings as we emerge from this pandemic. All too often, we've seen public transport cut when they do. Canada lags the rest of the G7 nations and most of the G20 when it comes to public transportation. But pride is not the only reason we must continue to invest. Cuts are a false economy. Transport poverty leads to physical poverty, social exclusion, increased living costs, loss of jobs, increased physical risks. Cuts lead to less livable and attractive communities, both for people and businesses. And in the end, that costs the Treasury in our country more. Better public transportation is not some niche concern of train and bus fans. It is central to many challenges we face in our day-to-day lives as communities and as a country. It is central to meeting Canada's goal of building a thriving economy while respecting our planet and its climate. Public transport is often the means by which we connect to each other, visit relatives, attend medical appointments, pick up groceries, go to school or college, get to work, do business, and more besides. Even for those of us who do own a car, public transportation gives us a choice, a way to avoid being stuck in traffic or spending many hours behind the wheel, and to claim back our time. Fixing our public transport system is also a key element in our commitment as a country to reconciliation with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Finding transportation solutions together, ending the risks caused by isolation and lack of safe transportation, is deeply woven into the process of building a better future. Today, each of us is joining this meeting from the traditional territory of one or more of the many First Nations that have inhabited this land for thousands of years, before the colonial era, before the building of the railways, and before Confederation. The land from which I'm joining the meeting today is part of the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, namely the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. These indigenous nations agreed through their ancestral languages to the mutual sharing of the land with obligations and responsibilities to the environment. Today, these responsibilities and obligations extend to all peoples. Together, we must advocate for and work to create a system that provides safe and dependable transportation to every community in Canada. An important part of our work is also to listen, to understand what challenges people face, so that we can advocate for investments that will solve those problems. And if we have the conversations needed to co-create the solutions that will genuinely work for everyone, every Canadian will benefit from it. Our guest speaker today, Mike Cassidy, is the owner of Coach Atlantic Maritime Bus, whose services span the provinces of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. Today, Mike is going to talk to us about the state of the bus industry in Canada, the challenges faced keeping essential services going over the past year, and the path forward towards building an interconnected network of services that makes travel straightforward and dependable once again, from coast to coast. So Mike, thank you for joining us today, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Terry, and welcome all. Terry, in your remarks, and we hear the word advocacy, we hear advocate, and we can have passion. Everybody on this call, we do have passion for public transportation, and we have a belief in what we are doing. And I believe that's what keeps us strong each and every day prior to COVID-19. But since March 16th, 2020, we all realize as we push, as we try to communicate, as we try to convince others the need for public transportation. It takes that level of passion. My biggest fear is there is passion today on this Zoom call. When we leave and we go outside our particular organization or my particular company, I am not seeing the passion. I am seeing politics. I am seeing this attitude, well, I don't need public transportation, so why is that important to me? Why do we need it in a country? And quite honestly, I would have thought that COVID-19, after we have trains not operating in some parts of this country, we have a reduced air schedule. The importance of busing in the last 14 months has carried the day when it comes to public transportation during COVID-19. Anybody that's rational would have thought, well, my goodness, let's use COVID-19 to get what we want from government. We need funding, we need programs. They have been listening for years, but doing very little. This has to be the time. And quite honestly, I don't think it is the time. Terry, I heard you on CBC last week. We hear the call-ins of people that have used the bus. We talk about Greyhound. Well, if COVID-19 wasn't going to help us get what we need for public transportation going forward, my goodness, Greyhound's announcement of shuttering its doors and leaving the country, that must be able to help. I still say it's not enough. Once you don't have passion in what you do, you're lost. In our maritime provinces, 1937, 1938, Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, two individuals that were business people, and they were diversified into a number of different industries. But both gentlemen had passion. Mr. Manning in Nova Scotia wanted to start busing in that particular province, and Mr. Irving wanted to start busing in New Brunswick. It was the era of bus, the launch of the busing. So we can all imagine how exciting that must have been in 37, in 38, when buses were on the road. And it was a business and we were going to move people. And yes, we could move parcel freight. All those years go by. I came into this business in 2005. Still with that attitude, I could make a difference. I am a group charter busser. And when I say group charters, for all of you here in this call, I call the group charters, it's a want. It's not really a need. If you want to go to the Rolling Stones concert, if you want to tour the Maritime provinces, if you want to play varsity hockey, it's a want. But if you're involved in public transportation, and we started municipal transit in Charlottetown, you really identify that there's a need when somebody is at a bus stop. They do not have access to a vehicle, and they want my bus to stop and pick them up and get them to where they're going. Municipal transit, it was easy for me in 2012 to take over what I would call the old Acadian lines, the old Irving inner line business. I renamed it Maritime Bus. But Maritime Bus, many have heard me say this, we are just public transportation on provincial highways versus public transportation on municipal streets. It was an exciting 15 years. Tons of battles, tons of hardship. The industry has gone through a full consolidation, rationalization. I do not believe in deregulation. We did not have deregulation in our part of Canada, and let me tell you, there's names that were operating in the bus business when I came into this industry that are no longer. We have acquired 16 bus companies, charter bus companies, bus tour companies in the last 15, 16 years, all for one reason, financial challenges. We want to exit the industry because we have a financial challenge. Can you help me, Mike? Coach Atlantic, Maritime Bus. We have 3 interlining companies that we have acquired in the last 8 years. One of your largest transportation companies in the world, Keolis, said about the Maritimes in 2012, we can't make money in this small marketplace. The market is small with 2 million widely dispersed people in 3 provinces of 133,000 square kilometers. Canada is vast, huge geography, not really a huge population. But Keolis, a big player in the world, said we couldn't do it. They presented to the Utility Review Board in 2012 that they were losing $2 million a year operating intercity transit in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI. We took over, and somebody said to me in August of 2012, do you have a plan? Well, yes, I said I had a plan. If the press asked me if I have a plan to take over intercity, of course I have a plan, starting December 1st, 2012. Quite honestly, I had no plan. I didn't even understand intercity, but I understood busing. I understood the difference between a want and a need, and I understood public transit on municipal streets. And I said, we need busing. And that's how we started. 2019, Maritime Bus did $10 million in sales. $8.5 million in passenger revenue, $1.5 million same-day parcel delivery freight. That particular time period, now I have to go back to 18 when I give you these numbers because Greyhound pulled out of Sudbury, Ontario West, October 31st, 2018. But in that 12 months prior to, when we were working with Greyhound, working with Orleans and Quebec, what we use in the expression in our business, interlining, I did $1.2 million with Greyhound, passenger and parcel freight. I did $1 million with Orleans. The significance of my $10 million in business is we have to interline with those carriers to move people outside of the maritime region and across the country. And it's proven. My buses are going to Edmundston, New Brunswick. We're crossing into the Quebec border each and every day prior to COVID-19. Why wouldn't I take somebody or some parcel into those areas going across the country or the reverse thereof? COVID-19 comes, there is no interlining. COVID-19 comes, Orleans stops in Quebec, and we're not going to move unless you give us government money. Greyhound shuts the doors on May the 13th, 2020. Everything is gone. The $10 million that we did in 2019, I am proud to say we broke even. I look at government and I said, why do I need a business plan for inner city busing? How many companies do $10 million in sales? There has to be a need. There has to be a market. Unfortunately, it's a capital intensive business. Very high operating costs. I spent $10 million. No corporate overhead, lean and mean operation, but I can tell you at around $2.50 a kilometer in our region, lean and mean, family business, passionate about what we do, you can break even. We're close. I wanted to go and make a profit in 2020 until COVID-19 happened. But here's my point. How hard it is when you're in business, you have passion, you believe in what you do, but you're not making money. Mr. Manning in 1937, Mr. Irving in 1938, it wasn't about the money. It was about the busing. I'm 67, and I get criticized by my 3 sons who were with me in the business. Dad, it's not passion. Dad, stop saying it's our responsibility to do busing in the region. It's not our responsibility. If government doesn't want it, shut it down, Dad. Now stop and think. My sons, I love them. They're educated. They know the business. But stop, Dad. Stop with the passion, Dad. Stop with the responsibility, Dad. And it scares me because the next generation, they don't have what the older generations have. Robert Irving sold the bus business in 2004. Why? I can only assume because they weren't making any money. Keolis pulled out in 2012, financial reasons. Greyhound's gone, financial reasons. Consolidations, financial reasons. But this business, it's fragile, it's low margin, it's capital intensive, it's hard to make money. But in the inner city, if you take your financial challenges and you remove the passion, we're all going to walk away from this business. So I take that passion, I take that responsibility, and I'm in COVID-19 and I won't shut down my business. I want my customers to be serviced. And we have losses and we try to keep going. We present to the House of Commons Finance Committee. We present to the Atlantic Caucus. We present to the Rural Caucus. We present to the Roundtable on Rural Development, on how to protect inner city. We talk about a rural transit fund. We fight hard. We communicate. We present. Inner city carriers like myself, we're regional carriers. We have to be sustainable. We have to be able to work with one another to have a coast-to-coast bus company across this country. You have a rural transit fund. We hear it's only eligible recipients are going to be not-for-profit entities, such as communities and municipalities. We hear it's for areas that do not have a transit system today. We would like to suggest that the for-profit companies like Coach Atlantic Maritime Bus, we got you to where you are today. Do not exclude us. We have existing networks. Do not exclude them. Allow for-profit carriers to be eligible for these funds with your new announcement of $250 million over the last 5 years. Make us eligible. Make our networks eligible so we can enhance. We can upgrade. We can buy new buses. We can be wheelchair accessible. We can have 2 or 3 electric in my particular case. We can combine and go coast to coast again because I'll tell you, coast to coast makes companies sustainable. And I give my example of Greyhound when we were operating fully at $1.2 million and Orleans at $1 million, 1 year's revenue. Help us, please. We have $75 million invested in this business with an awful lot of debt to go with that $75 million investment. But that's my commitment to this industry. I've heard this week that the Rural Transit Fund, I've spoken to Ted on this. I've had numerous calls with Terry on this. We thought we were somewhere with the feds. It's logical, is it not? It's rational, is it not? Busing's important. You saw what we did in COVID-19. Surely to goodness, for rural and remote areas, you're going to have a fund to include not only not-for-profits like communities or municipalities, but you're going to include for-profit carriers. You're going to include existing networks. As of yesterday, the federal interpretation does not include that. We are no closer to changing that fund than what we were 6 weeks ago after all of our hard work. Passion and having a responsibility and understanding public transportation. Everybody on this call, I think you're feeling what I'm saying because we all have it. But I want to tell you something. I've learned the hard way. politicians do not have the passion that we do. They do not have the sense of responsibility that we do when it comes to public transportation. I feel I've entered a political arena fighting for my life and fighting for the industry and fighting for something good going forward. And quite honestly, COVID-19 did not help us get anywhere. Greyhound's announcement did not help us get anywhere. I believe we'll come through COVID-19, we'll be exactly where we were in 2019. And I can only hope there's people like you doing what you do to push, to fight, to advocate. And I hope the generation following me in business will never lose passion. They will never lose responsibility. But I'm tired after 14 months dealing with politicians and the political system. You only get money if they've created a box that your company can tick. If you ask them to try to create something different, it's a long process. Many of you have fought long over the years, and we've had little wins and we've had some big losses, and you've had to have patience. There's no more patience. When there's a rural transit fund, I want the money, I want it to be funded, and we can use it well. And I do not think Minister Freeland, Minister McKenna are convinced that the timing is right for what we're trying to fight for. Thank you very much, and I'll open it to questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. I've got one of the questions that comes from Margot Gesser is, if the airlines got a huge bailout, why not the bus companies? And I think that's a very good question, don't you?
Well, you know, it's a terrific question. And do you know what scares me at times? I'm not a lobbyist. And I guess I don't quite understand the industry of lobbying. But people on this call, we advocate and we run a business. And I'll tell you, we don't have strong political lobbyists in my mind for the bus industry. I heard that there's no money for the charter buses. There's no money for the inner city, according to this new fund that Ted and I were trying to work towards. And we are low on the radar. It's just that simple. We are essential. They seem to put so much money into the municipalities and they forget about the areas outside the municipalities. And again, is it professional lobbyists? It's an industry on its own. And are the votes in the urban areas? I don't know, but there's no money for busing.
Peter Misek, I see you've got your hand up to ask a question. Go right ahead.
Yes, Mike, so I'm from Ontario, and I happened to attend a session yesterday where Minister Algahabra spoke to the Board of Trade, and he was asked, of course, about the Greyhound situation and, you know, tales of sadness, but really bucked it down to the provinces because he basically said it was a provincial thing. So what has worked in Ontario is this community transportation grant process. I guess it only goes to municipalities, like you said. Is there something comparable in the Maritimes, any of the Maritime provinces, a fund for community transportation? Maybe it's only for municipalities again and nonprofits, but is there something comparable? Because it's not perfect by any means, but we have found in Ontario these community transportation grants have stimulated a lot of public transport between cities.
Well, yeah, Peter, it's a very good question. Nova Scotia has 19 community transit little organizations.
Okay.
What I call that minibus, that van that does the work within the community, and maybe connecting one or two other communities. Scarce resources of labor and equipment, and you have to run to the city for a medical appointment. It would be awful nice if they could put them on Maritime Bus, which goes by that door, but we're not a door-to-door person. We're not a door-to-door company.
Oh,
We are on the highways. So there's a need for the community transport and the new rural transit fund that the feds have put together. That will help local communities for that minibus so that they can get assistance and operate that public transportation service within a community or within one or two communities. Our biggest argument was, what do you do when you want to get outside the community? You got to come to the larger centers. You got to go to larger communities. We service 40 communities each and every operating day here in the Maritime provinces. 40 communities we touch, passenger and parcel freight. We don't touch every community, but there's no reason why the little community transportation networks can't work with Maritime Bus. And we can interline together, no different than if you can interline across this country. You need a communication platform. You need to have a seat inventory. It has to be seamless for the passenger, but we can work together. But Peter, the new fund, the Rural Transit Fund, remote and rural, is exactly what you're talking about. But they're not going to let it go with the provinces. They're going to hold on to the money because you can't work with the provinces. But Transport Canada will tell you, my business is provincial. Even though it's federal because it's interprovincial and we cross provinces, they give the money to the provinces. They say it's the province's problem. So we go back and say, feds, the provinces aren't doing anything for us. Too bad. But what do they do politically? They throw $250 million over 5 years at community public transportation. But the week before, they threw $400 million over 5 years for rails to trails, bike, walking paths. Where? In municipalities and big cities. So they get $400 million, and rural transportation gets $250 million over a 5-year period. Billions goes to the urban transit, billions goes to electrification, 400 million goes to walking trails, active transportation, and 250 comes back down to the communities. And I am suggesting, Peter, what we're hearing after we fought for the last 6 weeks, our companies may not be included.
Okay, if I can go to the next question. I've got a few coming on the board here. Somebody did ask briefly whether about Maritime Bus interlining with VIA, and actually I recognize Maritime Bus actually a leader in that. But maybe Mike, you'd like to discuss what it would take to make that kind of relationship work right across the country.
Well, when it comes to VIA, you know, we rent from VIA at their Halifax terminal, Nova Scotia. We rent from VIA in Moncton, New Brunswick at their terminal. And if you're in Ontario, you can buy a ticket from Toronto VIA, prior to COVID-19, to Charlottetown. They just don't tell you that once you get to Moncton, New Brunswick, you got to get off the train and get on the bus, and the bus is going to take you to Charlottetown. But it's seamless. And that's what we mean by a platform. Our company talks to VIA, VIA talks to us, and it's seamless. This can be done. It can be done with the trains. It can be done with 6 or 7 or 8 strong regional bus companies. And if you gave me $30 million, I could put a 10-year capital program together with a fleet of buses going from St. John's, Newfoundland to Victoria, British Columbia, and let's call it the useful life of a motor coach is 10 years on a line haul. $30 million. Solved for 10 years. Federal support, provincial support, and carriers like myself would throw in 20 to 25% of the capital cost because you don't play free. My point was, if you want to be coast to coast in this business, you come with your checkbook. When you ask government for money, you don't ask them for 100%. You have to have skin in the game. This can be solved. And I have politicians nodding their heads on Zoom. I see their eye contact. I see their body language. I think they're getting it. And maybe they are. And we feel good when an MP talks to us. We feel good when you get an email, a text from an MP, and the MP says they're going to take it up the line. But you know what I'm scared now after so many months of doing this? Taking it up the line, where does it go? Sometimes I think it goes to a black hole up there in Ottawa. And there's no passion, there's no responsibility, there's no rationale, and we're not getting what we want. And I'm going to be very disappointed if what I heard this week comes true, that we're excluded from this new Rural Transit Fund. But it's going to be meant, Peter, for exactly what you said, a little community that wants a minibus, and it's right that they should have that need, and it should be fulfilled. Politically, the feds are going to throw them 50 grand, 60 grand to get it started. That's what's going to happen. But you can interline. It's very easy to interline. Very, very easy. And I'll tell you, Greyhound and Orleans, we weren't even computerized. Our dispatch, we're talking 11 o'clock at night with Greyhound's dispatch. How many you got? Catch that now. 2019. How many you got? Well, what do you mean? Well, what I mean is, how many passengers have you got on board coming my way? How many seats do I have to have on my bus? And then they would say, how many have you got coming our way? And you know what? We did it over the phone. Now, you can't do that today. We shouldn't have been doing it in 2019. Software is available if we spend a little bit of money. But my point is, if you want to make something happen, you can do it. And I'll tell you, you people in your organizations can fight, and we can operate business. Put us together, and we can make it happen. But if you've got a solid wall with the feds or with the province, and everybody laying blame at the Fed level, or the feds laying blame at the provincial level, we're in trouble. And I still believe busing is in trouble. And you know what's going to happen? I'm a business person. We have group charters. We have cruise ship arrivals. We have multi-day tours. We have school bus contracts. We have intercity maritime bus, and we have transit. And do you know what's going to take place? When you want to become business, we're going to drop some routes. We're going to drop some of our divisions, because our job is to run a business and to be sustainable. And my boys are going to start to streamline the passion and the responsibility that's not giving us a return on our investment. It's interesting. A little story, Casey Irving. I've got driver Blair. He's been driving a motor coach since 1967 here in the Maritime provinces. Years with the Irving organization. Each and every year, when he checked the glove compartment box of his bus at registration time, never did the registration in that bus have the owner as the SMT Bus Company of Irving. It was Midland Transfer, a division of Irving Oil. It was Irving Oil Shipyard some year that owned the buses. It was Irving Oil Pulp and Paper that owned the buses. The bus company never owned the buses. Mr. K.C. Irving, the founder, 1938. I don't make a lot of money, but guess what? They burn diesel and we refine diesel. Guess what? They go through rubber and I sell tires. Guess what? They buy my oil. Stop and think about it. You know, I don't have that. I'm not Keolis. I am a family business with a number of divisions with the heart to make this happen. And I'm asking the government for a small input, not just for my company, but for the industry. And I think I have failed. I do not think I have succeeded in doing a proper job to convince the federal government.
I certainly share your frustration with the federal government. It's been difficult to get a lot of communication from anybody in Ottawa over the last year. Certainly they're also working under some difficult conditions, having to try and do everything remotely. I have a question from Harry Gale, and he asks, have any provincial politicians shown the necessary understanding of the needs of the motor coach service, as you describe it?
Harry, that's a very good question. Yes, Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick, the province of Quebec and the province of BC provincially have assisted intercity carriers. It took a little bit of a fight. In some cases, it took, we're going to shut down the service unless you give us money. In my particular case, Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island are true believers, and they have helped Maritime Bus. But you got to be careful when we say this, Harry. I don't understand this safe restart money from the feds in 2020. The feds were throwing money at municipalities under the umbrella Safe Restart COVID. And are the provinces giving some of that money to the municipalities? Are the provinces using that for whatever else they have to use it for during COVID-19 times? Did we get money as intercity bus carriers from the province because they got the money from the feds? And if the feds don't give the provinces the money in 2021, can we expect to be helped by the provinces in 2021? Most of the subsidies for COVID-19, 80, 90% of every dollar somehow can be traced back to the feds. Even though it's a provincial program, it's backstopped by federal money. And the provinces can only do so much. And when you're interprovincial, and I want New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI to buy buses and have a maritime bus network and make application to the Rural Transit Fund, that's difficult. Provinces don't come together to make a one application. Very, very difficult. That's why the feds have this program and they control the money, and it's not going to the provinces. Wonderful way to set up a fund. They just don't know who to include as eligible recipients, in my mind. They have forgotten about maybe people like ourselves.
Okay, I see David Jeans with his hand up. David, go ahead.
Yes, hi, Mike. I'm in Ottawa, and as I'm sure you know, we no longer have intercity buses between Ottawa and Montreal. You know, a few days a week, Megabus is going to run between Ottawa and Toronto. But being a little more optimistic, you know, you talked about Orleans Express and you know, getting some Quebec government funding for them. In Ontario, of course, we have the government-owned Ontario Northland, which has greatly extended its network, both to Ottawa and, in fact, as far as Winnipeg since Greyhound exited. But with those kinds of things, do you feel that there is a likelihood that you'd be able to resume interline parcel traffic, at least on a limited scale, and then somehow also dealing with the other companies farther west that are you know, gradually stepping in to take over some of the Greyhound routes? Will you be able to do that if you don't get that significant buy-in from the federal government to supporting a nationwide interline system?
If we do not get the money for this interline system, I am nervous that the players that I've involved with, and we have been discussing Wilson's bus lines in BC, Pacific Western in Alberta, Casper Transportation, Northern Ontario, ourselves, Coach Atlantic Maritime Bus, and DRL in Newfoundland. We've been discussing that if we could get a capital subsidy, then we could put this together. We need some money to do a software program. And it's all based on the feds assisting us. Go back to the first part of your question, please, David. We'll still work with Orleans once COVID-19 leaves our personal and business lives and we can travel again. I have to go to Edmundston, New Brunswick. I may as well go an hour across the border to Rivière-du-Loup and meet with Orleans and take freight and take passengers that want to be in Quebec or want to be, for example, your hometown, Ottawa. Very, very easy. We can do that. The problem is when you want to go beyond, you get into smaller carriers, especially in Ontario with your deregulation July 1st, you got cherry pickers. They're going to cherry pick the best routes. That's all. In my business, I've got some poor routes, but it's my responsibility to look after those communities. And I take it as a total package. I could streamline it, David, and that 10 million in sales. Maybe I could make more money doing 6.5 million in sales rather than spending the time and the bus and the kilometers and the cost per kilometer going on the lower revenue producing routes. But inner city is a complete package. And Ontario, you're going to see cherry pickers. They have no need to interline, perhaps. It's going to be difficult. And we wanted to have 6, 7, or 8 committed carriers willing to have federal money, willing to put their own capital money on the line, willing to work together. Because I can prove to these inner city carriers who have never interlined, guys, 1.2 million with Greyhound from Ontario to Victoria. That is gold. The buses are moving anyways. Put somebody on an empty seat, jam another parcel underneath the bay of your bus. The bus is moving. What's it costing you? Mm-hmm. And David, it makes so much sense. Mm-hmm. And we can't seem to get the rationale yet. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe the feds will come out. I've had an MP talking to the Prime Minister last night. But again, I don't know. Mm-hmm. We're fighting. I'll throw this out to you. April 19th, there's a budget. Last year, we were down 70% or greater in our revenue. We got, on average, 75% wage subsidy. The new April 19th bus budget is this. June, Coach Atlantic Maritime Bus. Are you down 70%? Yes, we are. You get a 75% wage subsidy. Thank you very much for this summer. I need it. July, Coach Atlantic Maritime Bus. Are you still down 70%? Yes, and I'm losing lots of money. Good. We're going to give you a wage subsidy, but it's only going to be 60%. August, Cassidy, are you still down? Are you still losing money? Yes, I am, Ottawa. Great. We got a wage subsidy for you. It's going to be 40%. You know what the question is in September? You know what my answer is, and they give me 20%. I said to Ottawa, excuse me, highly affected businesses, still down over 70%, and you make the percentage of the subsidy decline? It would be different if your sales were becoming greater. I would appreciate the fact, yes, I don't need as much subsidy. But if you're still down, we're fighting with Freeland to try to get that changed. And there was a question on the floor yesterday or the day before on a tourism critic, Minister, how can these companies survive when you decline the amount of subsidy and they're still highly affected? We have government programs where we are looking after the tourism industry, Mr. Speaker, and we believe in our tourism industry across Canada, Mr. Speaker. David, I don't think that's an answer. It deflected the question, but my point is, if we can't even get wage subsidies, which is a pretty clear objective and a great reason why we still need them for highly affected, how are we ever going to try to run and get money across this country for buses? And this is the first time that I have spoken this way. My life is based on optimism, and I have fought hard over my life. This is the toughest ride I've ever been on, but now I'm coming to the point that I'm on my own. And when you're on your own, you start making business decisions based on numbers. And that gets scary because who I want to be and open for my customers, do you know what? I might not be able to do it any longer. That's what's sad. And you still want to do it, but you might not be able to do it, David. And we can't convince the funding programs yet. All the municipalities across this country, look at the money they receive for capital assets for city buses. Millions, millions and millions of dollars. And nobody can seem to see the other side, the big bus that goes in between these cities. Interesting.
Thank you, Mike. That's very clear.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's about 10 to 3, I think, in the Atlantic now. How much longer can you stay with us? I do have a few more questions.
Well, let's go. Let's have the questions.
Okay. So this one from John Rye. He said, how is the increase in online shopping affecting the freight side of intercity busing?
Well, thank you, John. They don't use us, unfortunately. They've got the so-called couriers. When it comes to online, the bus company itself, we're not set up for that. However, John, I go back to my 3 sons, and poor old dad kind of missed this, but we are starting a company called Simple Ship. It's all based on a platform. If you want to ship, we're going to come, we're going to get your freight, and we're going to get it to where you want it the following day. And we're going to interline with courier companies. We may deliver it ourselves. We're buying trucks, John, and we're going to try to develop this whole concept. Right now, we are bringing on our truck, this is unbelievable, everybody, Prince Edward Island, population 150, 160,000, depending on who you talk to. Through the Amazon only, John, we are bringing 3,000 parcels a day, 7 days a week to Prince Edward Island to be delivered. Now, we don't do it on the bus. We had to buy trucks. But we understand logistics. We understand transportation. So guess what? That's a pivot. We may get into that business because the online is just, it's just exploding. Now, if you want to know about inner city busing, when you have COVID-19 and you have lockdowns, my parcel business is up. When you can't travel to see family, friends, and relatives, what's the next thing you do? You get a care package. You get a package of love. And we are knowing that you get that care package, you get that package of love, you put it on the bus. The bus is going to get to that city destination tonight or this afternoon. You're almost guaranteed. You don't have to give it to Canada Post because you don't know what happens when it goes on Canada Post. You might have to wait 2 or 3 days. And our parcel business, now again, we're in the Atlantic, but we are averaging 1,300 parcels or bills of lading, I call it, a week. Usually there's 1.2 parcels in each bill of lading on average. So, 1,500 parcels. Mother's Day weekend, case in point, packages of love on the bus. We did 2,000 parcels on that Mother's Day week. That included Sunday, Mother's Day. So freight is up. Last year, COVID-19 times, I was doing 800 parcels before COVID, 800 parcels, 1,000 parcels a week. But we're up. Mom can't go see the daughter. Daughter is pregnant in Nova Scotia. What are you going to do? The crib is here in Prince Edward Island. The stroller's here in PEI. Mom can't go to Nova Scotia. So all the baby stuff gets on the bus and it's going over to daughter number 2 for her new baby. Those are the things that happen. Christmas, John, Charlottetown, PEI, we were sending 3 buses off PEI, 3 passengers, and all the buses were loaded with parcels. We had buses on the road at Christmas in our region because we were Santa Claus. So your family parcels go, but not so much online.
Okay, I'll take one more, another question that is from the question and answer box. Actually, I'm going to combine two, I think, into one here. Would a system like Saskatchewan had, but including the private sector, be a potential way forward? Could for-profit bus companies become contractors to the non-profit or governmental sector in building a network?
That is a very good question. And I believe that's how they've got the Rural Transit Fund established right now, where you can be a community, you can be a municipality, you can be a nonprofit organization, and you can partner with a company like myself to get funding. But that would make me just be doing something specific within a community versus trying to do a network. The idea of government saying we want to have a network and we want to have a private company do it. Well, I would say to government, what do you need the extra layer for? We don't need you there and contracting out to me. Why don't you just let us do it? So I get confused when I think of the strategy, and it's a very good question. If I'm understanding the question right, can government get involved and they contract it out to ourselves? And government, if it's the local level, can they get the money? So if I'm understanding the question, if the three provinces, for example, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI came together and they made applications to the feds, got this money as nonprofit governmental bodies and contracted out to Coach Atlantic Maritime Bus, that might be a way to get the money. But again, if you have to get three provinces to agree to make one application, does it ever happen? And do they all have the will? So it's complicated with the different layers, but we may have to, or does Coach Atlantic Maritime Bus become a nonprofit organization? And do I reincorporate and change my organizational status? That's another thing that we talked about. I don't want a crown corporation. I don't think we need a provincial agency because I worry about the layers of bureaucracy here. But again, it's something we're going to have to think about.
Great, thank you very much. So one more question. One thing that's being discussed by transportation advocates in general is road pricing, certainly for cars. As we switch from gas cars to electric cars, of course, the gas tax is going to disappear as a source of revenue to resurface provincial highways. And to a certain extent, that would, I think, change the way the market works. What do you think that the impact of that would be upon the intercity bus network? Is there a way that that could, in fact, make the bus market more sustainable, or would it make it more problematic? What are your thoughts?
Well, there's a couple things, and we all know what happens when provinces and federal governments lose revenue. It's tax. So right now, I could almost say to myself, the so-called provincial tax on a liter of diesel or a liter of gasoline at the pumps, mathematically, it's going to go up to make them revenue neutral, I would suggest. I would like to think that bus companies could become part of a player in this, and we can have our own electrification. We can start to introduce electric buses. But this whole concept, our provinces and our feds need money to operate. And they're not going to operate efficiently. They never have, and they're not going to start. And they got to get revenue somewhere. And it's a very good question. When they start to lose revenue, they still need to repair the highways, and I think it would just be a tax, and that would just be another burden. I can't even get our provinces to give me a credit on the road tax provincially, asking them for a form of subsidy. Why do I have to pay 15 cents or 21 cents per liter, depending on what province I'm traveling in? Why can't I get that back as a subsidy? We give the three provinces right now over $600,000 in diesel road tax. Now, they don't really want to give it back to me because that's a revenue item to them. But it's just going to be interesting. A good question, but complex answers over time.
Great, thanks very much. I have another question here. It's from Sharon Roseman. And he says, I'm curious as to whether conversations with provincial politicians around the Rural Transit Fund are focused on the impacts of provincial austerity budgets, with cuts looming in my province of Newfoundland and Labrador that may reduce or eliminate more health or other basic services in smaller communities. It seems there'll be even more need than before for rural residents to travel frequently into cities and often over longer distances.
Sharon, you are right, but the provinces are saying this is a federal administered fund, this new fund. It's going to help. The new Rural Transit Fund is going to help a community in Newfoundland, Labrador get its own shuttle bus service within the community or connecting to 2 or 3 other communities. But you know yourself, you got DRL. And we've been fighting for DRL. When I present to the federal government, you've got a carrier, you got a bus company that travels the island each and every day. What are you going to do for that company to make that company sustainable? It's a great concept to have community transit networks, but you still need a regional carrier. And why can't you have both of us together and help us both? But the provinces right now aren't even looking at what the feds are looking at. The province is just sitting back. And I think they are so focused on COVID-19 that they're not even thinking about us properly, Sharon.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I think, speaking from my own experience, when all the bus networks that were run by About Town Transportation out of London shut down about 10 years ago, I tried speaking to provincial politicians and said, look, you need to recognize this as an emergency. People were riding those buses to get to their medical appointments. People were riding those buses to get to their jobs. And there was silence. And then a bit later, I heard in some meetings that the government was kind of worried about the fact they're spending $100 on taxi fares to get people to hospital. It's like, wouldn't it be simpler to do something called a bus? Peter Myasik, I see you have your hand up again.
Yes, Mike, I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. So we've got this federal rural transit fund, 250 million over 5 years, and it's only nonprofits can apply. So can a province apply? I think you said yes, but I just want to make sure I heard it right. I mean, obviously municipalities can apply. Can a province apply? And so I think if yes, the idea would be then that province could partner with a network-oriented company like yours, as opposed to just a community-oriented company. And at least for a larger province like Ontario, that's not a bad way forward. It still doesn't get you the interprovincial stuff, and you've got a challenge because you've got 3 small provinces. But so Mike, simple question, can a province apply to this federal fund, or does it have to be a smaller nonprofit?
Peter, now we don't have all of the detail, and I don't have the federal interpretation. When we heard about this fund, we were fortunate enough 1 or 2 days later to hear, Cassidy, we're telling you, this is only for communities, municipalities, nonprofit, and it's for areas that does not have transit now. And I said, it can't be. That's not how it was suggested. We've had local MPs saying, Mike, this is the fund that you're going to need. So we've fought the last 6 weeks to say, please, include the communities, include the municipalities, include nonprofits, include new areas, but also include for-profit carriers who do existing networks today. We heard this week, it's not going to happen. They're going back to communities, municipalities, nonprofits, where there is no transit today. So Peter, I don't even know if a province could be an eligible recipient. Okay. My feeling, and again, but we don't know, and maybe they will. Now it was suggested, Mike, why don't you go to municipalities and let them get an application? Well, yourself, Peter, do I go to Mississauga? Do you go to Guelph? Do I come into Toronto? Like, where do I go? Like, I mean, no, Mike, those are too big. This is rural. Okay, where do you send me? How much rural communities? I'm talking about across Canada. I know I could pick 3 communities in Ontario where it's rural, it could be remote, and we could set up a little bus system for you. But I'm talking the network regionally, and I'm talking nationally, something we need. Don't exclude national and regional for the sake of little communities. But Peter, if I was the Fed and I could throw 50 grand, 60, 100 grand in a number of communities, and there was an election this fall, please, I don't know anything that I'm talking about here, but is that politics? You take 250 million, Peter, and throw it across the country over a 5-year period and make certain communities happy and not have a sustainable bus system, even after COVID has shown we're essential and Greyhound can't survive. Yet, Coach Atlantic Maritime Bus, we have survived in our region when one of the largest companies in the world said they were losing $2 million a year. We can do this. We just need a little help.
Well, the key thing I've learned from you is that we want the network orientation, not just the community orientation. That's what you're bringing.
Yes,
but
and
to
Peter,
make a network orientation work.
But Peter, I'll just interrupt for a second. And here's my presentation to the communities. I want the communities to have a bus network, but it's going to be volunteers, perhaps driving. You're not going to have a number of units. You can't send those units and labor on long trips. So why don't you interline with a company like myself? And for the first time ever, Peter, we're going to share the revenue. I use the interlining model. If somebody leaves Halifax and goes to Ottawa, I get a portion of the ticket price, Orleans gets a portion of the ticket price, and Greyhound got a portion of the ticket price because it took 3 of us to deliver that passenger. Well, guess what? I might have sold the ticket, but at the end of the month, I had to give Orleans their share, and I had to give Greyhound their share. So if you're a little community in Ontario, Nova Scotia, Alberta, Newfoundland, Labrador, and you get on a regional transit carrier to go to a larger city, I would not have that customer, or any other inner city carrier would not have that customer if it wasn't for your local community transit system. Therefore, you should get a percentage of the ticket that I sold that customer. And the reverse thereof, when I take that customer back to you and you meet me and you take them back to their home community or point of departure, there's a sharing of the ticket. So I said to government, I can create a revenue source for these new community transit organizations because we want to be fair. We have a computerized software platform. We sell tickets. We do the accounting. We share the revenue. It makes sense, everybody, except to decision makers, those in influence to make it happen.
Okay, thank you very much. I have one more person with a hand up. Arto Kaklika. If you unmute, you should be able to ask your question.
Yes, thank you. I didn't really have a question. I'm sorry if I raised my hand, but I just wanted to say that this has been very, very informative for me. I still don't understand why, if it's just a matter of funding or is it a matter of coordination between the various organizations, agencies, industry to get interregional transportation going. I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me. I don't understand why that's such a challenge, where the government sees transit, municipal transit and rural transit as being valid for funding, but the linkage, that other part that links all these regions together in this vast country, is left behind.
And Nardo, yes, thank you for saying you don't understand it. Well, guess what? I don't, and we don't. We as carriers can make it happen because please, back in 2017 and up until October 31st, 2018, you could go from Halifax to Vancouver with Maritime Bus,
right,
Orleans, and Greyhound. We had a system. Now we lost the system Transport Canada spent a year, 2019, developing a transportation plan. It was supposed to go live in February of 2020 at the first ministers meeting. It never surfaced, and we can't find it. But they spent all of 19, Ardo, trying to decide about busing in our country, and everybody's gone silent. And we've come up with a very, very good solution. Strong regional carriers willing to put their own money in. It's an interline system. This is not new. This is not new. We've done this before. But remember, it could take $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 to finish the online software system so we can all communicate seamlessly with the inventory. Those are the things that someone's got to help us with.
Yeah, no, but I like the point you made also. It's not about moving just people, but it's goods as well. And you have a role there that's really important in many regions of this country.
Well, Ardo, I can tell you across this country, I'll just use agriculture or I can use fishing. And, tell me that you lost a part on the motor and you have to set sail again early tomorrow morning, or you have to be in the field early tomorrow morning. Put it on a same day bus delivery. It gets to your community, pick it up at 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 10 o'clock that night, work all night, get the part in, and you're back on the water or in the field the next day. The elevator breaks. We're bringing elevator parts because, as you know, every time you want to go get a part, they say, sorry, we're out of stock. You got to get it from a major center. Well, the bus leaves the major center and comes back to your community. And we do it every day.
Yes.
And we do blood. Ardo, I do blood out of the Dartmouth Canadian Blood Supply.
Wow.
And I service 8 or 9 rural hospitals in New Brunswick, PEI, and Nova Scotia when they want me to, each and every week, 2 to 3 times a week.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And don't give up.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that question, and thank you again, Mike Cassidy. Mike is the owner of Coach Atlantic Maritime Bus and has shared the last hour and a quarter with us of his time, and we greatly appreciate all the insights. So, so thank you very much.
And Terry, I do appreciate what you have done for busing, especially in the last 6 weeks when we kind of had we were given possibly a gift on this Rural Transit Fund. Thank you for being so involved. To all of you, you heard me say it, you do have passion or else you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. I know we're fighting hard. Ardo, you're right. I'm not going to give up, but I want to communicate my feelings today. When we have to become strong, core business people, we give up on what I stand for. And that hurts me the most. I think we can be good business people and we can still provide a service. We can still make a return. But if government's going to force good business people to slash and cut divisions, it's the wrong way to go. And remember, in 2004, one of the biggest companies, Irving Oil, got out of busing. 2012, Keolis got out of busing. 2021, Greyhound got out of busing. Coach Canada, Megabus, sold. Stagecoach sold. First Student, selling. These big conglomerates, they're cutting, slicing, and we have to watch it. And I just wish politicians would believe in Canadians and Canadian companies and what we want to do for our country. God bless and look after yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you have a great day. And
thank you.
We're going to take a short intermission here, and then we'll move on to the business part of the meeting.
Just one point before Mike goes. You confirmed, Terry, that you're able to put Mike's presentation on our website so that others can see it or access it later. And I think we should do that as quickly as we possibly can, and refer as many politicians as we can to that particular video, because it's something that they should watch.
Indeed it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're ready to begin the business part of the meeting. So first of all, to all of you, the members, the volunteers, the board members who've made our work possible, thank you. You've made getting through this past difficult year very much easier. Even while we can't meet in person, we've managed to keep up our education and advocacy work throughout the year, working together remotely, meeting using Zoom, and using online campaigning tools. Shortly before our last AGM, we delivered a pre-budget submission for federal budget 2021, calling for a strategic rail infrastructure fund to the House of Commons Finance Committee. And we followed up with this over the winter as the budget consultation progress moved on to the Ministry of Finance. While we didn't get everything we wanted, the budget did include a welcome $491.2 million in infrastructure funding for Via Rail, touted as a down payment on the high-frequency rail project, the creation of a permanent funding stream for public transit, and a boost to the National Trade Corridors Fund, some of which will go to rail projects. And we've just heard that this funding has secured the future of the Huron Central Railway, which is one of the things we had asked the government to be attentive to. Transport Action is the voice of intercity and rural passengers, advocating integrated rail and bus networks across the country so that Canadians can get around freely and aren't at risk of being stranded by the roadside. And thus we were delighted by the announcement of Rural Transit Solutions Fund by Infrastructure Canada on February the 10th as part of a larger $14.9 billion announcement for public transit projects over the next 8 years. And that will include permanent funding of $3 billion a year after 2026. This permanent long-term capital funding will provide new subway lines, light rail, streetcars, electric buses, cycling paths, and improve rural transit. And unlike previous capital funding programs, which have been linked to existing ridership, this fund will address transport deserts and close gaps in services. Although, as we have seen from our presentation earlier from Mike Cassidy, it's far from perfect so far. Infrastructure Canada has begun holding consultations on the rural aspects of the new program with regional transit agencies and holding roundtables with interested parties, and Transport Action has contributed recommendations through that process. I was pleased to join a roundtable hosted by Giddy Hutchings, the Member of Parliament for the Eastern part of Newfoundland earlier this year. The cancellation of the last Greyhound Canada service has also brought the subject of motor coach services sharply back into the news, with the media heralding it as a disaster for rural and Indigenous communities. We recognise that disaster has been going on for more than a decade as routes and frequencies have been cut and cut again. However, following the sudden closure of Saskatchewan Transportation Company in 2017, the subsequent loss of Greyhound across the West in 2018, dozens of locally owned and Indigenous-owned companies have emerged to operate these routes. And some of the real unsung heroes of the pandemic include bus companies like Casper, Maritime Bus, DRL Coach Lines in Newfoundland, Mountain Mikes in the Kootenays, and their drivers and staff, who've kept essential services going to smaller communities, with social distancing and other safety measures on board, and with very little financial support from any level of government. After a year of this, it is time for the federal government to step up and ensure these services can keep going through the last phase of the pandemic and will be there to support the recovery of their communities too. That's why I was delighted to get a call earlier this year asking us to support a proposal for an essential bus network. This proposal for a coast-to-coast bus coalition has now been delivered to the federal government, and details can be found at www.travelccbc.com. We believe that a little federal leadership to ensure interline ticketing with fair conditions of carriage, to restore union terminals in key cities so connections between buses or between bus or rail are straightforward, and help Canadian companies invest in fully accessible vehicles will go a long way to ensuring the funding announced in the Rural Transit Solutions Fund delivers real solutions. We want to connect rural transit leads to bus and rail branches and trunks so Canadians can once again get around easily. It is time for the federal government to resume stewardship of a national network for Canadians to travel across Canada. It should be possible to look up bus and train schedules and book travel through a single desk online portal. It ought to be possible to buy a ticket from Corner Brook to Hay River and know that you won't be stranded if there's a delay along the way. Today, that journey is theoretically possible, but would require the passenger to work out at least a half dozen separate tickets and take a few walks where buses don't have a shared terminal in cities along the way. Canada must do better, and we've requested a meeting with Minister of Transport Omar Alghabra to follow up on our previous correspondence. Since the withdrawal of Via Rail service on Vancouver Island in 2011, the campaign to restore it has been steadily making progress. The BC government commissioned a study by WSP Canada that suggested a frequent modern service could be reinstated for considerably less than $1 billion, a small amount compared to welcome investments that are being made to expand Vancouver's SkyTrain network. Transport Action is supporting and collaborating with a new group, the Vancouver Island Transportation Corridor Coalition, to step up campaigning and have raised funds to support the creation of a television commercial and online video to communicate the opportunities that restoring rail service would bring to communities along the line. Another of the online campaigns we organised over the winter was to encourage residents in northeastern Ontario to write to their politicians, reminding the Ontario government of its promise to restore the Northlander passenger train cancelled in 2012. The campaign generated hundreds of letters, and in this spring's budget, the Ontario government committed to get the funding to get the job done. The initial business case, just released, suggests the train might not run before 2025, and so we'll be keeping up the pressure to bring that timeline forward and to ask MTO to give Ontario Northland its full support in negotiating a train service agreement with CN that guarantees reliable on-time operation. We've continued to hold meetings with Via Rail management throughout the year, and the high-frequency rail proposal has continued to be a subject of those conversations. With a provision of the Joint Project Office report to the government in December, we hope that we will soon receive definite answers to questions that we've been asking since 2016, including clarification of the route into Montreal and Toronto, and assurances about the future of services along the existing corridor through Kingston and Drummondville. Finally, Via Rail are understandably excited, despite the challenge of more than a year of crisis management, by the arrival of the first all-new trains in 40 years. With the rollout of the first Siemens charger from the factory last week, shortly to be delivered to Via Rail for testing, we're seeing more than a decade of advocacy for new equipment beginning to pay off. The 32 new trains will provide corridor services for the next few decades, whether or not the plan for dedicated tracks does go ahead in full. However, the future of Via Rail service outside the corridor is in serious doubt. Via Rail desperately needs new sleeping cars, particularly accessible sleepers. The two Renaissance accessible sleepers that are used in the Maritimes are life expired and cannot be expected to operate much longer. And the older but better built stainless steel sleep will reach its 70th birthday in 2025. It took 10 years for Transport Canada to give Via Rail permission to order replacements for the aging LRCs. And it will have been 15 years when the first Siemens trains enter service next year. The long distance fleet was temporarily taken out of service for structural inspections last year, which would have probably caused a significant disruption to services if the pandemic had not already done so. Repair work completed, has borrowed the fleet some more time, and frequent inspections will ensure its continued safe operation for as long as possible. But the clock is ticking toward midnight. It will take about 5 years to design and build new equipment. So unless the government acts soon to start the process, there will be no remote or long distance service by 2030. Our ongoing task as Transport Action is to save and rebuild the backbone of our national rail network, the trunk without which the routes, the branches, and the leaves, intercity motor coaches, urban transit, and rural transit are all compromised. Thank you.
Terry, before you move on, may I make a comment?
Yes, Peter, go ahead.
So I'm Peter Mizek. I'm the president of the provincial affiliate in Ontario, Transport Action Ontario. I think, Terry, your report greatly undersells the stuff that needs to be mentioned from Transport Action Canada. I'm thinking of all of the advocacy support you do to my organization and probably across the country to the other provincial organizations on local advocacy issues, urban transit, local regional matters. The other thing you're not mentioning, and I think it needs to be mentioned, is the administrative support that TAC provides, membership processing, financial tracking, social media, newsletters. That's a really important role that your organization does. And I just wanted to bring that up so that the rest of the 37 participants on this call today recognize that vital role. I mean, if you look at the total organization, the Transport Action family, most of the advocacy is done at the local level. It needs coordination, it needs admin support, and you guys are, and TAC is vital in that aspect.
Thank you very much, Peter. We'll move on now to the Treasurer's report.
So the Corporations Act requires us to submit our financial statements to the annual general meeting each year. I'll be showing you those financial statements in a moment. Some generally over the year, surprisingly, in the year 2020, we did about the same as in 2019. Both years we ended up in the black, though 2020, not surprisingly, we were a little closer to breaking even than to just breaking even, but we did okay. We saved money in some areas and we made more money in other areas. I'll show you that in a moment. A couple of things to highlight that, well, you can see on this slide, the bottom line numbers, our overall income, 16,612, and I'll show you where that came from. And the expenses, a little less than that. And financial position, which looks very healthy, $33,000, but I'll explain a couple of things about that $33,000. The highlights, things to mention that had changed in the year is that we now at the national level handle the accounts for Transport Action Ontario. We previously already did that for the Prairie regions and British Columbia by holding their funds derived, for example, from the regional share of memberships in our bank account, whereas Ontario had their own bank account and their own bookkeeping. But we've reached an agreement with Ontario that we'll roll that into the national bookkeeping. We'll administer Ontario's funds the same way that we do Prairie and BC, and we are taking over Transport Action Ontario's bank account, which had nearly $13,000 in it. Now, Transport Action Ontario is not a registered charity. And just in case in the future, Transport Action Ontario should decide to separate from Transport Action Canada, or if, for that matter, Transport Action Canada as a registered charity should be wound up for any reason, we are able to return that money because we're showing it as a long-term loan on our books. The second point is that we have now gone almost entirely to Canada Helps for processing our donations. This greatly reduces our check handling, the amount of banking we have to do, and the tax receipts that we have to issue. Canada Helps takes a reasonable percentage for doing that processing, but actually gives us better exposure, works very well with our website, and also through their own website, brings in donations from people who may not even have known previously about Transport Action. So that's working very well. Finally, one other new thing this year, Terry already mentioned the Vancouver Island Transportation Corridor Coalition. They have joined Transport Action as an affiliate member, and we have a fund to which people have contributed to support their program. That fund has also been matched by Transport Action British Columbia, so that right now there's about $2,000 available for us to contribute towards the advertising campaign that they're about to mount for restoring train service on the island.